Welcome to episode 63 of the podcast, and I am excited to have another author on the show. His name is John Jarman, and I met this man the same place I met Carol Chisholm last week when she was on the show. I met John in Lexington, Kentucky at a conference where he was meeting people and telling people about this book that had recently come out at the time. It is called Broken and Redeemed, Finding Freedom Through Complete Surrender. And before we jump into this book, I want to read this to you guys. And before I introduce you all to John, on the back of the book it says, with no memory of his childhood till the age of 12, John Jarman had no conscious way to overcome the unknown pain in his past. When his adult life crumbled around him, he finally reached out for professional help, both emotionally and spiritually, and over the next 10 years, this inner work led John to places he and his counselor would never have expected. As John moved closer to God in the process, the storm hit harder than ever, taking him to his knees. And this book will bring you through the story and see that you can discover how God did a work in John's life. But John Jarman, how are you doing? Good to see you.
I'm doing good, Josh. Thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, little disclaimer for everybody who's listening. We tried to record this episode yesterday. You guys don't even know, and we had all sorts of technical difficulties, but John was gracious enough to come back the next day so we could record this because it's such a worthwhile story for many people to hear of what he went through and how God brought him through some very difficult things. And the book is called Broken and Redeemed. The website is brokenandredeemed.com, and he shares his story so that other people could hear it and be helped as well. If you are someone who's dealing with past trauma and hurt and you are having a tough time finding a way or seeing a way out, I think John's story is one that would be extremely helpful. So just reading what I just read, how can someone who, in their adult years, how can you have no memory of what happened on in your early childhood?
Well, I as I told you yesterday, I didn't really know I was a victim, and for a long time I thought I avoided all the abuse that went on in my house and the violence for years. It wasn't until I moved back to the Northwest in 2005, and then about a year and a half later, I sought out counseling because I saw self-destructive behavior start to pop up because I was growing in faith and I was looking back on my life and the things that I did and I was like, I can't do this again. And so I sought out counseling, and that's when, I found Christina Holland and we worked together for, about 10 years. And it was during that time that I realized that, I didn't escape the violence and what those things that took place during my childhood and how that formed me as an adult, some good and some not so good, and so that's the part of that brokenness that the title refers to.
Mm-hmm. When you were in your childhood years, did you have any kind of a faith background? Did you grow up in a home where your parents were involved in church at all, or was this something that it was just absent?
No, church was completely absent. I didn't have any. The only thing that was ever mentioned to me about Christ or God or anything is when I visited my grandmother in Arkansas, and she would always tell me, Johnny, God's got something special planned for you. Mm-hmm. Other than that, we didn't go to church. I think my first church service was when I was in boot camp, and that's where my first exposure to a church, and then my first exposure to Christ and the Bible and everything was then. So.
Yeah. So let's go a little bit into that story. You in your home, you had some brothers, and were you the youngest?
No, I was the third of four.
The third of four.
Yeah.
And so you're growing up, and there's a situation where you detail some of these things in the book. Your father was an alcoholic.
Yes.
And so it sounds to me like when he would be drinking, that he would it would had very negative consequences for the family and everyone involved.
You can say it, Josh. You got violent.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a home of violence, and it it wasn't pretty. And so, at age 12, he was, I woke up one night, he was beating up my mom, and I went into the kitchen and grabbed a knife and told him if he didn't quit, I would kill him. And he left that day and never came back. And so, and then the violence stopped. I'm not going to say that my brothers and I never got into any fights, or I never got any fights after that, because that's how I resolved conflict when I was a kid. Is I resolved it through my fists, and that's not a good way to resolve conflict, but that's all I knew. And so working through all that with Christina it was which led me to finding Scotty, and then working through all the faith and this, I guess, the soul searching of my transgressions, so that I was able to break free from all that chain and bondage that I was held down by.
So was your first memory that you can remember now, sitting here now, the time when you went and got the knife and said, "I'm going to kill you"?
Yeah. Yeah, basically. See, I look at pictures of myself when I was like 8, 9, 10. I don't remember. I can see the picture, but I don't remember anything about it. I mean, I'll give you a little example. So at 8 months old, I had what they call osteomyelitis in my upper arm. So I have 3 major scars. You can see one of them right here. But I have 3 major scars on one of my arm. And it was, I was told that I spent 2 months or 3 months in the hospital. They had to do 2 major surgeries. And when I looked up that disease later in my life, it's the cause of it is a compound fracture or a severe case of pneumonia. And I was told that I had pneumonia after I had the surgeries. And so in my quest to kind of find out what happened, I contacted the hospitals in Arkansas that were open during that time, and none of them had a record of me in the hospital. 2 of them, no record. The other one said their warehouse where their microfilm caught on fire and they lost half their microfilm, so could have been in there, but I don't know. So there's no record of me being in the hospital with this. And if one of the results is a compound fracture, did that happen? We don't know, never will know. But that was some of the stuff I was working through Christina, because I wanted to know. I don't have a baby picture of me before the scars were on my arm. So it's that's kind of a weird thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be very strange to just have kind of a blank space when it comes to memories and seeing pictures of yourself like that. So you have this moment, you get the knife, you said, leave, or stop or I'll kill you. And your dad leaves. He's gone and he doesn't come back. And that kind of sets the story on a trajectory to where there's this go-between of where obviously the emotional trauma and scars and pains of what your mom's going through, she's probably not really understanding how to deal with that on her own. And here she is, and she has these kids that she's taking care of, and then she has a lot of pent-up frustrations, anger, and hurt, and sees the world through a lens, and she shares that with you all, and it kind of sidetracks
just kind of snowballs.
Yes.
And my brothers and I, we all kind of went our different ways. I mean, my 2 older brothers dropped out of high school. My oldest brother, he went and got a job so he could help support us. My other brother, started partying, got in the drug world. I kind of followed him into that path. So, from the time I was 12 till the time I was 23, I was in the drug world and partying. My little brother kind of just did his own thing, and, he got involved in that as well. I played athletics in high school, and that's what kept me in high school. Otherwise, I probably would have dropped out too. So.
Do you think obviously none of the brothers could at the time probably explain it like this, but we all look to medicate ourselves in certain ways, right? Trying to mask pain or something that's going on inside of us. And it's always crazy how the devil just makes these things readily available to us, the things that we probably need the least from a spiritual perspective, but then they're right there for us. And it again, going back to snowballing, and it just sets everything on a bad course, And so you had football.
I had football and track, and I credit one of my track coach. I credit him in the book for keeping me in school. But the whole time I was there, I was doing drugs and partying on the weekends. So I didn't really care about school. It was a way to socialize and be involved in athletics, because I got involved in football because my 8th grade football coach, I got kicked out of school for fighting. And so he said, why don't you come out on the football field so you can release that anger, and people are going to cheer for you. And so I was like, okay, so I started playing football for that reason.
Yeah.
And I learned how to harness that kind of and let it go during the games, and kind of pull back from it when I wasn't on the field. But I had a temper for a long, long time. So
Yeah. What position did you play in football?
I was an offensive defensive lineman because at the time I was one of the bigger kids in high school. So,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah. And so, the quarterback, you could take it out on the quarterback if you had some
I could take
frustrations.
it out on anybody because the offensive defensive line, it's kind of hand-to-hand combat in there. You can do some things and never get caught, so you can you can punch some people and do some things that the refs never even see, so
Yeah.
but and I credit that to keeping me on track through high school. Like I said, I wasn't the greatest student in the world. I found out later in my life I have dyslexia, so that was the issue. Back in the 80s, they really didn't test you for that. You were just you were labeled as a problem child. They didn't have all the tests they have now to label you, and so it was a little different for me back then.
So what's going on at this point? When your dad left, was there any contact at all, or as you're playing football and as you're doing these things, or is it?
I had a couple visits with him, and when I was in high school, a couple times I'd fly over to Colorado and spend some time with him, but not much. And when we got there, it was my dad remarried. My stepmom and him were married longer than my mom and him. And over the years, I called her one of the toughest ladies in the world because she kind of tamed my dad. He curbed his drinking, his temper got better, and it was amazing to see. But I didn't have much contact with him until I was in the Marine Corps. So
okay. Yeah, and we'll get to that Marine Corps thing in just a little bit, but I'm always curious of when you grow up in the situation that you did grow up in, and you see probably a lack of love on display, not really an understanding of how to love or even how to interact with the spouse or any of that. What did that, or even with children, what did that do to you on the inside? Learning those probably wrong lessons.
The biggest thing is as Christina said, I put an armor on right then, and I had friends, but I wouldn't let them in. Even when the book came out, my high school girlfriend read the book, and she calls me and she goes, "John, how come you didn't tell me any of this?" And it's because it's the shame that you have from it, and you don't want people to know that you went through this, even though that's the best way to heal. But the mind's a weird thing, and you feel like you're the only one that's ever gone through this, which you're not. And you feel like no one's going to understand it. And what I felt like is if they knew, they would leave me, and I don't want them to leave me. And so I'm not going to tell them all that. I mean, we just had a 40th reunion celebration this past weekend, and some of some of my friends in high school, they had read the book, and they're like, "We didn't know any of that." And I said, "Because I never told you. I didn't want you to know." Because that was the protection mechanism that I had. So I just didn't let anybody get close enough because I didn't want to get hurt again by them leaving. So that's how it affected me. And that affected me until I got free of all this. So in all my relationships.
Yeah, especially in your story where the first time you remember yourself standing up and to your dad, he's gone. And I think that would kind of sow a pathway into your brain that, man, if I ever am honest or if I'm ever really standing up for something, that's going to end in someone being gone, and it just repeats itself over and over again.
Yep.
So you finished high school football. Did you play in college?
No, I never. I played 1 year, hurt my knee, and never went back.
Okay.
And so from that time on until I was 23, I just kind of ran around the city I lived in Renton, Washington, and partied, did drugs, and then one day I was like. It was New Year's Eve, 1987. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I left a party because I was like, "There's got to be more to life to this." I walked out of the party. 2 days later, I walked into the Marine recruiter's office and I said, "How fast can you get me out of here?" And he asked if I committed a crime, and I told him yes, but I've never been caught. We talked for a while, and 2 months later, I was in San Diego. And so, that to me was God looking out for me, even though I didn't know who God was. And because that was my out, and that was the start down the trajectory to becoming a football coach and a PE teacher and helping kids, and then we're ultimately working through and ending up where I am today. So
yeah, and it often doesn't work out the way you think, right? Where you can see God's hand on something.
no.
Man.
But it's what's amazing though is looking back on my life. When I was working with Scotty and looking back and seeing where God's hand was, even though I didn't know him, because you can see that way better now than you could as I was going through what I went through.
Yeah. Did you ever have moments where this just came to mind during that time when you're probably, 18, 19, 20 years old? How old were you when you joined the Marines?
I was 23.
23 years old. Did you ever get down and really upset and just think, my goodness, there's really no way out of this? Or were you just kind of pressing through?
I just kind of pressed through. It was a survival thing for me. It wasn't until I got in the Marine Corps when I started to understand that I could die, because I'm in boot camp training to be a Marine.
Yeah.
Who knows where I'm going to go? Who knows what combat I'm going to be in? And so that's when I really started to go, okay, where's my life going? What am I doing? And that was the first really moments when I started to think about something like that. And so that's when I started, like I said, we started going to church when I was in because I was like, maybe there's something to this God thing, and I need to know about it, because I could get shot on a battlefield and never come home.
Well, that's kind of the funny thing that you share in the book is the Marines offer you guys an opportunity to get a little time out and go to church or find something. Was it an FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes?
Well, I found FCA when I started coaching.
Okay, so that was later on.
When I started coaching. Yeah,
okay.
That was later on. Is when I found Fellowship of Christian Athletes.
So the Marines, though, they do give you an opportunity to go to church and spend some time away and all of these things.
All those services, they feel that's important. That the soldiers, the Marines, the Navy, all those guys that they have, and outlet or connection to the church. So
yeah, and I always come back to, and I'm always interested in talking to someone who didn't hear about a relationship with the Lord until later on in life, because I grew up in the church. Mm-hmm. It's always been a part of my life. I haven't known the world without Jesus, and I'm blessed in that, and I'm thankful for that. But then here you are in the Marines, in your 20s. You got this history, you got trauma, you got all this stuff going on, and now you're hearing about God, and now you're hearing about God the Father. Right. And what is that? You told me before, you're in the Marines, hey, at some point I can get sent somewhere, and there's a chance I could be killed if. Mm-hmm. And so you're interested in God in that sense, but what about God the Father? What did that sound like to you?
That it sounded foreign to me for a long, long time, and it took a long time to understand that aspect of that and the relationship part of that. Because it was like my thought early in my faith was, okay, if you're supposed to be my Father, why did you let me go through what I went through? Mm-hmm. Why didn't you stop it? It's the ultimate question you get all the time, I'm sure, is why does God let bad things happen? Well, it's not God. We're in a world that's full of sin, and so it's not God that's letting that happen. So, uh-oh.
Are we back?
I'm back.
Jordan? Hold on, we lost it again.
Tell you what, the devil doesn't want this message out, Josh.
Jordan? Hold on one sec.
Yep.
Yeah, were you working on something there? Yeah. Just start it again? Okay. Okay, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hold on. What? Okay. Well, you can walk out. Is it still recording in there?
Yeah, the video's going.
Yeah. All right, so we were saying that, I do get that question quite frequently.
Yeah,
why does God allow things like that to happen. And it's a tough one for sure. And I think that would be one.
And that's, I really had to search on that for a long time. And when I met Scotty, he allowed, his understanding of the word and the way he disciples people and the work with him. And it really opened my eyes to a whole different side of Christianity and everything. So, I mean, Scotty gave his life to Christ at 4 years old. He's mentored and discipled probably 1,500 people in his life. And, he continues to do that even now. So, and so his wisdom and understanding of the Bible was just amazing. And that's what helped me break through a lot of this.
Yeah. And so when you go through the Marines and here you have this time in church that you're spending here, are you fully exploring a relationship with Christ at this point? Because when does it come into where you go and you visit your dad at the house and you knock on the door?
Yeah, well, so when I left boot camp, I went into MOS school. So I was over in Maryland for like 6 months, and then I went to Okinawa, Japan. So it was about a year and a half after I was in the Marine Corps. And I was looking back on my childhood as much as, when my dad left, what my mom was saying, what my dad was saying. And, parents in a divorce situation is, in my mom's, defense, she was bitter and resentful and angry from what my dad did, which I cannot blame her. But she never sought out counseling. So she made up stories about my dad and not the child support not coming in. And so I had a bunch of questions about that. So I said, when I go back home, I'm going to just go find out the answers. And so I flew to Colorado, and I got to my dad's house. I knocked on the door, and he opened it up, and I punched him in the mouth. And he stood up, wiped the blood off his lip, said he deserved it, and let's go have a beer and talk. And so we talked for hours, and he showed me everything, paperwork, all this stuff. And then I got on a plane and I flew home, and I confronted my mom with it because I wanted the truth. And I didn't want her lying to my brothers anymore and all this stuff, because all that deception doesn't do any good for the children who have been through that. And I used to tell my parents of football players who are going through divorces is you're connected to that child for life because you guys had the child. So if you guys can't get along, don't pit each other against each other with, using the child in the middle as a kind of a tug of war, because it doesn't do that child any good. So you're going to have to come together and agree on things when you're with the child. And if you guys don't like each other, do that privately. Don't let your kids see it.
Yeah.
Don't talk bad about your spouse in front of your child, because it doesn't do anything good. So,
So at what point then in your relationship do you make a full commitment? Let's talk about the redeemed part of things, because obviously you can see where this brokenness could come from, and you're trying to these pieces get put back together. And what was the moment where you can look back and say the relationship with Christ really happened?
Well, the surrender part of it, I could go to the surrender part, or I could actually go, I guess it started when I met Scotty. And I started on a daily prayer plan, and I started reading the Bible on a daily basis. And then, going through all that work with him, and releasing the strongholds that were holding me down and all the bondage. But it wasn't until 2016 is when I really broke free, because I was going through some tough times. I just lost a girlfriend I prayed for a Christian woman, and we started dating. After 4 years, we broke up because her kids really didn't like me, and my business was failing. My little brother's wife was on her deathbed. And so I'm going through all this, and one morning I woke up and I fell to my knees and I said, God, I'm done. I can't do this without you. I'm giving you total control. And that was the thing I held on to most, Josh, was the control. Yeah. Because I always, you hear it's always in God's timing. Well, John wanted John's timing for up until November 20th, 2016. And that's when I gave up complete control. And that's when I really started seeing the Bible different. I started seeing the world differently. The Bible opened up to me way more than ever before, and it just, my life, I felt like the world was lifted off my shoulders, and that's when I truly gave my life to Christ, is that surrender moment.
Yeah, and really began a process of even going back then and dealing with these things that we're talking about in the beginning, which was a process of forgiveness and really working through that. We talked a little bit about this before. There's a really important part of the book where you're instructed or asked by your counselor to write a letter to your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And that first letter that you sit down and you write, it's pretty harsh. It's a hard read in the sense that you're really trying to work through something, and it's an interesting thing.
And as I told you when I wrote that letter, it really didn't affect me as much. I put the words on the paper and that's how I felt.
Yeah.
And when I retyped the letter into the manuscript, that's when I went, wow, that was kind of tough, because at that time I'm writing that letter, I wasn't the John of yesterday. I was, I'd given up control and I had been walking in faith since 2016. And so it was a different feeling when I read that letter. I was like, man, that was pretty harsh.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it needed to be said, because that's how I truly felt. And so that's why I included it in the book. So.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, some of those feelings and the different things had to come out, right? I mean, it was
absolutely
part of that forgiveness process. And
so I like to call it the self-examination. So, it says that we're to examine our heart and to find out what's not of God, and we need to get rid of that. And that self-examination is the hardest part, I think, of the Christian faith and the Christian walk, is because that's the hard part. That's the part that's going to get messy and bloody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think you need to have a mentor to help you through that, because, you're going to have questions, you're going to need some guidance. And, there's been times where I've asked Scotty, hey, should I contact this person and ask for forgiveness? He goes, no, just pray over it, because the wound is so deep that contacting the person is not going to do any good. They're probably not going to forgive you, so just pray over it and let it go. But there's other people, he said, yes, contact them. And so that wisdom that he had on that regard, it helped tremendously.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that is wise counsel, right? Because, I mean, you do share some stories where you're not, for good reason, wanting to go into details of certain stories to protect the innocent who probably had nothing to do with it. But you do ask for forgiveness of people who might get their hands on this book and know your story well, And it's an important part of it.
I mean, I had one of my former football players, he read the book and he contacted me and he goes, do you remember who I am? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, here's what you said to me. And when he said that, I was like, wow, I don't remember saying that, And I said, he goes, why weren't you like this when you were coaching? And I said, because I was a different person. I wasn't where I'm at in my faith, and that wasn't, I'm a totally different person now. And I said, all I can do is ask you for forgiveness. And he said, okay. And he gave me his forgiveness. And it was a beautiful thing, but, I understood where he was coming from, because I wasn't the person that I am today. I wasn't that person back then. So.
Yeah. And over the course of time, how many, so you said 2016, where is really where you made this full on commitment to Christ. And then you are meeting with your counselor, Christina. Is it Christina?
Yeah,
her
Christina,
name?
yeah.
Yeah, and she's the one who really encouraged you as you went on and on in this process, and from brokenness to redemption. She encouraged you to write this out in a book to help others.
Yeah. Well, I think it was to help me, to be honest with you, Josh, because she suggested I write the book back in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was more of a healing for me, because it was a healing process going through all of this. I started the book in 2014, wrote 5 chapters, and then I didn't know where to take the book. And so it sat on the shelf until 2020, or 2021, sorry. And that's when I completed the book. And the book was done in 4 weeks. It was a spiritual dump, and the words I would get up and I would pray and I'd start writing, and it would just flow. Mm-hmm. And my editor goes, who's your target audience? And I went, didn't really think about it, just wrote. I was just hammering the keyboard. And I said, anybody? And she goes, you can't do that. And I'm like, well, you read the book and tell me who my target audience is. Mm-hmm. And she wrote back after she read the book, she wrote in her review, she goes, I don't say this often, but your book is for everybody. Mm-hmm. So,
Yeah, and at the end of each of these chapters, you have little sections that are study guide helps, that if there's groups who want to go through this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wanted to have people go through that examination and to look at where they're at in their faith walk. If somebody like you who's been a Christian all his life, hopefully those questions will challenge you as well as somebody who's just coming to Christ, and it'll help them, get deeper with Christ. And I guess that's my teacher in me, because I wanted to help people look inside themselves as they read the book and see where they're at in their walk. So.
Mm-hmm. And it does a good job of that for sure, because I think anyone who reads this book will be able to relate to some things, even if you're not coming from a place where you had significant trauma when you were a child. Most people,
Right.
I think, can relate to the process of trying to work through something and find God in a situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that in your story that has some down moments, but now you're able to look back and see where God's hand was on you through those things
Absolutely.
is so helpful, especially to young people.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you wrote it in that sense. When you put together, you put out the book, you got the website. What is the goal overall for you? Is this something that is a kind of a one and done thing, or is this a continuing ministry that
it's I have a book that I'm kind of working on, and I don't work on it a lot. It's called the work chapter, or the title is even slipping me right now. The Test of God, because so here, I'll give you a little background stories. When I started to get deeper in the Word, I used to hate reading the Old Testament, because I think as a new Christian, the Old Testament can be scary. I called it the dark side of the Bible. And so we're working through this with Scotty, and I hate reading it. And so there came a time when I was working with Scotty that I wanted to get a deeper meaning of the Word. So I entered seminary school, and I didn't finish my degree. I'm about 8 hours shy of a master's of theology. But the first class that I was enrolled in was Old Testament review. And so when I saw that on my sheet, I just kind of looked up at the sky and I said, "Oh, you got jokes." Because here's God going, "Okay, you don't like it, we're going to make sure you read it." And then I as I was going through that, my brother's wife had passed away, so I moved him in with me because I didn't want him dying of drug overdose. And so I was up one morning reading the Bible and praying, and he got up and he goes, "What are you doing?" And I told him, so he started doing it with me. So I didn't want to go through the Old Testament with him at the time because I didn't want to freak him out. So we read the whole New Testament. We got done. He goes, "Where are we going?" I said, "We're going back to Genesis." And so we started going because I felt like I had enough knowledge. If he had questions, I could ask. If I needed to talk to Scotty, I could do that. So we get to Exodus. In Exodus 20:20, Moses says to the people, "Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be in you to keep you from sinning." So I read that morning, and the verse is Exodus 20:20. And all day I kept thinking about that verse, and I was like, what's clear vision? Clear vision's 20:20. So that's God's clear vision. He wants us to understand that he is going to test us, and he's doing it for a reason. But then I took it a step farther. I wanted to find out how many other Bible verses in the Bible have that address. And do you know how many have that address, Josh?
Tell me.
I'll quiz you here. 17.
Oh,
13 in the Old Testament, 4 in the New Testament. 10 of them have instructions on how we're to act and behave as Christians. The other 7 are just parts of stories. Because I wanted to see what that 20:20 looked like in the Bible.
Yeah.
And I now have that tattooed on my arm.
Nice.
Part of it right there. So going through the Marines for 4.5 years, never got a tattoo. That's my first tattoo.
And your reminder to finish that book.
Huh?
And your reminder to finish that book, right?
Yeah, and a reminder to finish that. And it's just, that book's taken a lot of research, so it's going to take some time to get done. But it is in the work, and it's just something that God placed on my heart, because, I think the test of God is what we as Christians struggle with sometimes, because we wonder why we're going through things that we're going through. And sometimes it is God, sometimes it isn't. And that's, we have to figure that out. And that's where a mentor comes into place. And, for your listeners, if they're new to Christ, find a mentor, somebody who's farther along the walk who can help you out.
Right.
So.
100%. What's the line that I've heard so many times is everybody wants a testimony. We just don't want the test.
Right.
And that is it's a very true statement. There are so many things that I have shared in parts of my story where whether it's a painful situation or whatever it may be, something that God really used to grow me and to get closer to him. Yeah. Had I had the choice, I would never choose it.
Right.
If God showed me beforehand, here's what you're going to go through, I would say, no thanks.
Nope.
I don't want it. So,
but when you look back on it, you understand the reason of it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, in my role as a pastor, I've had so many times where a mentor of mine who I meet with once a month, has told me, "Hey, I'm sorry you're going through this, but understand this. You will be a better pastor because of this."
Yeah.
But again, I go back, but I don't want to. I know.
It's just, and here's the thing, Josh. Your tests are different than ours. Because everybody's tests are different. But you didn't have the tests that I went through because you were. You were a Christian from the time you were young. Not saying that that's the total reason why, but your tests are a lot different. So, everybody has them. Everybody goes through them. Yeah.
So man, John, you got a couple homework assignments. You got to finish that master's of theology.
Yep.
Okay, and then you got to finish that second book, which is going to take a little bit more time.
Right.
And so you got those two. Now I would be curious, as the book has been out now for what, a couple years. 2 years?
3 years. 3 years as of this August. Yeah.
3 years. So you talked about the one football player who called you. Do you have any other stories of someone who read this book and?
Yeah, the biggest one, Josh, is I had a young lady who was a few years behind me in high school, and she found the book and she read it, and then she direct messaged me through Facebook, and she said, had she not found the book at that time in her life, she was going to commit suicide. And so I put her on a reading plan. I encouraged her to go back to church and find a mentor, and stayed in contact with her on a weekly basis just to help her get going. And she's reading the Bible every day. She's going to church. She's got a mentor. She's in great shape now. And I tell people all the time, if I don't sell another book, that was worth it, because I saved somebody's life.
Yeah.
There's a young Marine who I don't know. He read the book. He wrote on Amazon that he was struggling with his faith. He saw the book and he knew I was a Marine, so he grabbed the book, he read it, and it helped him strengthen his faith and it helped him come back to faith with God. And so those two testimonies right there, I mean, that's enough for me,
Yeah,
and when I wrote the book, I didn't, it was more of a healing project than just, hey, if I can help one person come to Christ. I mean, that's what I told my publisher. He said, what's the goal? And I said, if I can help one person come to Christ, then the book's worth it, so.
100%. And I'm sure when you were sitting down and writing out your story, you said you started it out as probably for you. At some point, you had to be thinking, man, I wonder who's going to read this one day. And to actually now hear from people, it's amazing.
And it's amazing, Josh, because on the 2-year anniversary, I had my publisher send me a list of places the book had sold. And I've sold a couple books in Australia, a couple in Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, and Poland. And so to know that book has gone that far and touched lives in other countries, that's very humbling, and it's a blessing. So.
Yeah. And so the website itself, brokenandredeemed.com, is that really just a place where people can contact you, or is there an ongoing purpose?
I have testimonies there. It's an online store. You can buy the book. You can buy, I have coffee mugs. I have t-shirts. I've got all the paraphernalia. I put a daily blog on there. It's called My Daily Bread. I also put those on all my social medias. And what My Daily Bread is, it's basically a passage from my Bible study in the morning. But I kind of turned it into a series now. And so I started with hope, and then I went to joy, and then, so I take one word and I search the Bible for that one word or a form of that word. Right now I'm doing wisdom. And so any Bible verse that has wisdom or a form of wisdom is, I read it in the morning, and then I post it on my social media. And I had a lady just in my reunion, she said, John, don't stop those posts. They're helping me. And I'm like, okay. She goes, I read them every day. And I'm like, awesome.
Yeah.
So I can't stop. And I've done them since 2016, I think I've done over 8,000 posts. So
that's awesome, man. Keep it going.
Yeah. So that's the website's just that. It's a place where people can leave testimony, buy the book, kind of see what I'm doing and stuff like that. When I get the link for the show, I put it on there so people can, have the links to the podcast that I do and everything like that. So
that is wonderful, man.
So
go ahead.
Well, I wanted to touch something because it was heavy on my heart after we talked yesterday, Josh, and that's the forgiveness, because we had a great conversation about forgiveness.
Yeah. And
I didn't want to leave that alone, because I think that's a huge topic for Christians on the forgiveness aspect, and I know you kind of said the same thing as we were doing this yesterday. So I wanted to make sure we kind of did talk about forgiveness aspects. So
yeah, and so the one thing that I think we were getting into yesterday was, a lot of times I think people think forgiveness is something that is kind of an immediate thing that takes place in their lives. Like they are told that I'm supposed to forgive someone, and then immediately, boom, all those feelings and everything is gone. And I think we lose sight of the fact that forgiveness really is a process. And
It is a process, and what I like to tell people is it doesn't release what happened to you. It releases you from the bondage. And then if you can tell the person, so like I was able to tell my dad I forgave him, and that broke a lot of chains. But did it change the fact that what he did? No, absolutely not, because you can't change that. But it frees you from that captivity of it.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the biggest thing that I try to convince people on forgiveness. And after we talked yesterday, I was driving in the car and I thought of it. You've seen the movie The Shack. Have you seen that movie?
I have not seen that movie.
Okay. So there's a beautiful, example of forgiveness, because the dad, his daughter got kidnapped and was killed. Okay. And so he's in the woods and he's with Christ, and Jesus is like, there's one more thing you have to do before we can send you back, and that's you have to forgive the guy who killed your daughter. He goes, I don't think I can do that. And he goes, you have to. And they go through this whole dialogue, and I thought about that. I said, that's one of the most beautiful depictions of forgiveness that I've ever seen, and so that resonates with me as I talk about forgiveness. So
yeah,
I mean, think about that. You have to forgive the person who killed your daughter.
I listen. I mean, it seems impossible, right? I mean, it would be, to me, the only way you could do that is with the strength of Jesus to be able to do that. And I think, going back to what you said, it's a freeing yourself of bondage, right? And that is so hard, though. It's so hard to work through. And I know there's probably so many people who are carrying unforgiveness in their hearts and don't realize it's eating them away from the inside out.
Well, and I think that's where your mentor can help, because what Scotty did is we worked through me forgiving myself to God. Forgive me for this sin, forgive me for this, forgive me of that. And I think once you've done that, it's easier to start to forgive others and who have hurt you, is because you have to be able to love yourself before you can love somebody else. And I think the forgiveness that you get once you have that strong relationship with Christ, I think that allows that to happen. So
yeah. One of the things that comes to mind, I was thinking about that football player who called you and who had read your book and said, how come you weren't like this, and your response, please forgive me. But I bet you there's a lot of stories that we have, that you and I would both have, where you have interactions with people, whatever it may be, that maybe something came across the wrong way or whatever. You never interacted with that person ever again, but they are out there holding that against you. And I know for me, I speak for a living. I do messages each and every week. I've got these 2 podcasts that I do. I'm saying things all the time where I guarantee there's moments when people are like, you know what, that guy can go take a leap off somewhere else, right? And people who are upset with me. And
but that's them. You can't control that, and you don't know it unless they tell you. And if they tell you, then that's when you say, well, sorry, but it's something they don't agree with it. And you got to agree to disagree, and you need to forgive me.
Yeah, and that's.
I mean, I had that conversation a couple of weeks ago with a colleague. I said, you got 2 choices: you either hold this and you hate me, or you forgive me and we move on.
Yeah.
So.
Forgiveness it's such an important thing, and I actually see that, going back to your story, and I think when it comes to family, that's where it can be the hardest, is. Because there is such a history there, even from the beginning of life, and you have all these events and things that happen, and it seems hard to walk through.
I mean, Josh, I even asked my older brother for forgiveness, okay? Because here's a guy who dropped out of school, got a job so he could put food on our table, and I took advantage of that. I just did my own thing, and hey, he's doing this, great. I mean, that's going to help me survive. But when I got to where I was in my faith, I was like. And Steve and I were driving one time by ourselves, and I said, Steve, I need you to forgive me, because I treated you so badly. I took you for granted. I truly appreciate what you did, and I love you for what you did. And that was a moment that we had together. So.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, and it's not an easy thing to get to that point. But again, I go back to the process of it, right? And
so let me share this story because I think your listeners will appreciate this. So this is what I call a God thing. So my brother Steve is dying of liver and kidney failure because of his drug use in his past, And so he was home on hospice. And so we were having basically a party for his coworkers to come say goodbye to him. And at the end of the party, my then girlfriend Leah and I, we took Steve for a walk. He's bound to a wheelchair, but we took him outside and we're walking down past this park near my brother Jason's house. And I look over on the wall, and Steve was questioning Christianity. And there he was a Darwinist. He believed in evolution, and he wanted to know, how do you know Christ is real? And I kept talking to him about it, and he eventually did accept Christ. But as this day was going on, I walk over. There's this book on the fence pole, and I grab it, and it's a Bible. I'm like, what is this doing here? And it's open to Psalms 51. So
really?
Yeah. So I took it over to Steve and I read the psalm to him, and I said, Steve, God's forgiving you for everything right here. I said, he loves you. And it was an English Bible, but all the handwriting and everything was in Spanish. So it was really weird. So I put the Bible back where I found it. We took Steve home, and then Leah and I left, and it was probably a matter of maybe 30 minutes. And I potentially drove past the park. The Bible was gone. So
wow. Yeah, for anyone listening, Psalm 51 is David's prayer of repentance and asking God for forgiveness for his sins with Bathsheba and all he did there. The standout is, create in me a clean heart, God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. And it's such a powerful thing. And I think it's a prayer we all should pray all the time, right? And that's one of the prayers Lord, forgive me for the things I know about and even the things I have no idea.
Exactly.
Just cleanse me of those things, Lord. Yeah.
And I think that's a daily thing that I think a lot of Christians forget is every morning we need to ask God for a renewed heart and renewed mind. Because there's so much in this world, especially in today's world, there's so much clutter and junk that we could get caught up in. And if we don't have that renewed mind and heart every day, it's tough to take that walk.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I love it, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate you and appreciate the book, and I'm wishing you the best on these continued things that you're going to be doing and writing.
I appreciate it.
And helping people. And so, when you write these things down and you put that story out there, God uses it to extend in ways that you have no idea about. And so thank you, man. Appreciate you.
No, I appreciate you, and I thank you for what you do, and I appreciate you reaching out and getting me on your show. This is the humbling part of what this book has done in my life and what God has done in my life. And I'm just thrilled every time I can get together with somebody and share this testimony.
Wonderful, man. Well, his name is John Jarman. The website is brokenandredeemed.com. That is the name of the book, Broken and Redeemed, Finding Freedom Through Complete Surrender. And he wins for one of the best book covers that there is. I don't know if you made that, but it's always caught my eye. So yeah.
So here's a little story about that before we go, is that waterfall is in New Zealand.
Okay.
And the title of the waterfall is Devil's Punch Bowl.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's near Christchurch, New Zealand, on the South Island of New Zealand. Because I did some research on it, because people ask me if that's me in the picture, and I'm like, no.
You wish it was you in the picture, because that's an awesome looking place, man.
Yeah.
Oh.
And here's the thing, I appreciate it, because the feel of that cover is like no cover I've ever felt. And you can attest to it because it's in your hand right now. But the publisher did an amazing job with it, and I just truly appreciate what they did.
Yeah, it really is a great cover. I'll hold it up one more time because it catches your eye, and it is a beautiful thing. And so it definitely captures that broken and redeemed look. So anyway, thank you, John. Appreciate having you on here. Wishing you the best. Everybody go to brokenandredeemed.com. Go get this book and read John's story. So we'll be back next week with more episodes, and going to continue on talking in these themes and how we can help people. I believe my guest next week will be Joe Hussung, who is a biblical counselor who deals with people, helping them through anxiety and depression and things of that nature. And so click and follow and subscribe, all that fun stuff. Click the bell notifications, anything you got to do, man. Just be on here. You get to hear great guests like John Jarman. And so we'll see you all next week. Have a great one. Bye-bye.